Spazek. I am the Flood Resilience Educator for Lake Champlain Sea Grant, but I am not the one to be thanking for putting this on. I think the real praise goes to your zoning administrator of Hardwick, Kristen Lake. So this is a 4-part speaker series that Kristen reached out to Emily Finnegan, who is part of the Caledonia Natural Resources Conservation District, because there was a lot of hot topics coming out around water resources, flooding, and the idea came up to bring a couple of experts for a multi-part speaker series to talk about these different topics and have a discussion with the community to try to improve all of our knowledge about these topics and have a really thoughtful and valuable conversation. So today we are talking about beavers, natural infrastructure in rivers, thinking wood in streams, things like that. What is the role of that? What are the benefits? What are the disadvantages? And so this is one of those hot topics that has come up. Last week we talked about dredging, and so if you want to listen back to that, I think it's recorded and on the town website.
It is on the Town of Hardwick website, so hardwickbt.gov.
Yep.
And it's under flood resources. And there's the handouts, the slide decks from last week's, and then each of these will be on there.
Yes. Yeah, and it was very informative. I learned a lot last week, so it is good if you weren't there, you can listen in. In 2 weeks from now, we're going to be talking about dam removal, and so we have 2 more speakers coming in for that. And then the last one is on October 1st, all about climatology, and we actually have the state's climatologist coming to give a presentation. So tonight will be a kind of more of what you think of as a panel discussion. We have 3 panelists here who are going to sit up front, answer a few questions. Then we're going to open it up for the audience for the last half an hour to answer your own questions. Before we get started, just a few good ground rules to keep in mind. We are so lucky to have these 3 really experienced and knowledgeable people here. So let's make sure we're being respectful and we're asking questions out of curiosity and not out of any other emotion. So with that being said, maybe we'll introduce some of the partners, and then we'll have our panelists sit down and introduce themselves. So you know who I am. You heard from Kristen. If there's anything else you want to say?
No.
No?
Welcome to Hardwick.
Yes, welcome. Yeah, and then we have a few other folks here who were involved in planning these speaker series. So if we want to just go down the line, I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Kyle. I work with the Northeastern Vermont Development Association, so we're the Regional Planning Commission and Development Corporation for all of the NEK. I personally didn't help put this on, Allison Lowe did, but I'm here in her place tonight.
Right. I'm Alexis Nevins. I'm a new floodplain manager for the Northeast region of Vermont, so excited to be here.
Hello, I'm Emily Finnegan. I'm the district manager for the Caledonia County Natural Resources Conservation District.
Yeah, you did that.
Sorry?
I said, yeah, you did that.
So Emily is kind enough to bring a projector, so we might have, this is pretty a traditional panel discussion, but we might throw up some visuals here to kind of help show you all what we're talking about. So I don't know if it makes sense to set that up right now.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Okay.
We'll just be sneaking behind.
Right, so maybe we'll have you all take a seat, and one by one, if you want to just say who you are, what your job is, and what is a little bit of your work that you do that's related to this topic. And then maybe we can test the mics too. I don't know if you need them or.
I tend to be pretty loud.
Yeah.
You need them.
Yeah, which way? And
Whenever the people in the audience are asked, they always say you need them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me back in the back?
Not if you talk that quiet.
Okay, I'll project. My name is Meg Carter. I'm the Conservation Science Director at the Northwoods Stewardship Center. I can't remember all your questions, Allison, so I'm just going to wing it. We, in the Conservation Science Department at Northwoods, specialize in the implementation of projects that have positive water quality and wildlife habitat benefits. So in relation to beaver work, we have done quite a few beaver dam analogs that we've installed. We also formerly had a crew in partnership with Trout Unlimited who helped to do some strategic woody addition. We have also built, actually just last week, one of my coordinators and our executive director worked with Skip Lyle on a beaver deceiver over on Mount Pisgah. So I'm definitely not a river scientist or biologist, but I have gotten my hands dirty and my waders wet. So that's what I'm bringing.
Hey everybody, I'm Tyler Brown. I'm a wildlife specialist with Vermont Fish and Wildlife. I've been with the department since 2012. I've held some various roles within the department. Started in the fisheries division, working with fisheries biologists and kind of electrofishing trout streams, trout monitoring. Worked on the Lake Sturgeon project in Lake Champlain for a number of years as well. And then in 2016, I transitioned over to the wildlife division and started with the Beaver Wetlands Conservation Project. And I'm sure we'll get into that in a bit, but quickly or briefly, that program was established in 2000 as a way to provide additional resources to landowners, towns, and road crews who are having issues with beavers, and the goal being to maintain beaver-created wetland habitat while resolving the conflict that the beavers are creating. So I've been doing that since 2016 and have picked up a number of other tasks since then as well. Some private land habitat work, Act 250 regulatory review stuff, miscellaneous fur bearer work as well. And I'm based out of the Springfield office, but I work statewide.
I am Erin Rogers. I am the program manager for Trout Unlimited. And in case there's any confusion, that's with Trout Unlimited National. A lot of people are more familiar with chapters that do work across the state. So I'm kind of one of the few paid restoration scientists for the organization, focusing largely my work on Vermont and Massachusetts, sometimes helping out partners in neighboring states as well. But in our kind of focus work in stream restoration is really looking at cold water streams, which is trout preferred habitat. They need cold water to survive, and they need clean water to survive, and they need connected water to survive. So really anything that hits on those kind of points that are going to help create more resilient populations. And luckily a lot of that dovetails with healthier river systems for fish are also going to be healthier river systems for humans and for flood resilience as well. So our work targets anything from in-stream habitat restoration, replacing culverts, taking out dams, doing all sorts of floodplain restoration, erosion control, kind of the full suite of, if it happens on a river that's good trout habitat, we can probably find a project.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So we're really lucky because we have such a kind of diverse mix of expertise that all generally have something to do with our river systems and wildlife and ecosystems like that. So starting kind of broad, because this is a somewhat broad topic, all in kind of related to beavers and wood and streams and things like that. So can you, maybe each of you or one of you, just describe what is the role of beavers or beaver-like structures, wood dams, things like that in our streams? What are maybe the ecological benefits, the flood resilience benefits, human benefits?
I can get us kicked off, I guess.
Sure.
So yeah, beavers play a really important role in our water quality and our ecosystems. When beavers move into a stream, they can alter that landscape, and they really can help start the basis of the food web. So when a beaver moves into a stream, builds a dam or a series of dams, they're helping slow that flow of water, and they're helping increase that productivity. So they're going to increase the abundance of your phytoplankton, your zooplankton, your other macroinvertebrates, and that's going to feed your trout and your other fish species, which are going to help feed your mink, river otter, herons, kingfisher, etc. And then you're going to have your other mammals like your black bears, your moose, that are all going to focus in around these wetlands as well, because it provides a really good place for biodiversity and a lot of plant life that these other animals that are using in some portion of their life cycle. So there's a lot of benefits for having beavers on the landscape for fish, plant, and wildlife, but there's also a lot of benefits for having beavers on the landscape for us as well. So again, going back to when beavers build that dam in a stream, they're helping slow that flow of water. They're catching a bunch of sediment, and when we get those rain events, rather than that rain and that water just kind of continuing to pick up pace as it goes downstream, that dam acts as like a speed bump and helps slow that flow of water. And also, what's really important is in locations where it can happen is when a beaver dam is built to a point where it's raising that water level up, it can help reconnect that stream with its floodplain. And rivers that have access to their floodplain is really important for helping reduce downstream flooding, because all that water is going to dissipate over a bigger area rather than just kind of gain momentum going downstream. And a really good example of that is Otter Creek. So Otter Creek, from really where it starts in Mount Tabor, Danby, all the way up through Rutland, and then especially through Pittsford, Brandon, Cornwall, up to Middlebury, there's a lot of conserved land in that stretch along the Otter Creek. And Otter Creek's allowed to jump its banks during heavy rain events. All that water floods out over the floodplain, and it reduces flooding downstream. Middlebury doesn't see a lot of flooding because of Otter Creek, because of that connected wetland habitat that's associated with the river. It can flow over the banks and reduce downstream flooding. And beaver dams and beaver activity kind of all play into that as well.
I can kind of tag in next. So for me, it kind of starts, 150, 200 years ago or so. It can be really easy to forget, like when we see our forested watersheds now, and everything is forested in, the Green Mountain State, except that at one point, almost everything had been cleared down to fields. We have touched every part of land in this state. You can go miles from what feels like anywhere these days, but you'll still find stone walls, which means it used to be somebody's field that they had cleared and moved all those stones and all those trees were down, and that's grown back up now, and that's great. But all at one time, a lot of those streams were straightened, a lot of boulders were taken out of those streams, all the wood was taken out of those streams. So for me, I kind of look at it as a function. So putting trees back into streams, putting wood back into streams, letting beavers do their thing in areas that is safe and removed from, infrastructure that could be, affected by it, is letting the river restore its actual functional process. It allows it to slow down, to get pushed back and forth. It creates that back and forth sinuosity that we should be expecting from our streams that a lot of the times we don't have anymore. So it's definitely the more that you can do, the better. It starts to build off of each other. So you can do small little discrete sections of, adding wood here and there, but if you can find larger sections, especially in the very upstream reaches, you can have a lot of concentrated benefit that either isn't going to affect people at all, but have a huge benefit for your whole ecosystem.
I feel like an important principle to that I had to wrap my head around getting into this work is that in these riparian systems, inefficiency is good. It's really good. We don't want aqueducts, right? We don't want water to hit the ground and then immediately flow to its destination. We want it to get a little confused up in the watershed. We want it to hit those speed bumps. We want it to find the sponges that are out there in nature, an intact woody buffer or forested area, if you've ever looked at the duff layer in those areas, that is a natural sponge that just holds water and then slowly releases it both into the ground and into the surface water systems. And so the wetlands that are created up out in the watershed by these beavers and other wetlands that are naturally occurring or are restored have that flood attenuation effect, because the water that could all be flowing straight down into these main stems is getting held up, is lounging somewhere up in the watershed, rather than becoming problematic down below. So I feel like making sure that there are those spaces for beaver activity and for wetlands to flourish and for natural forest floors to build up a duff layer are really critical for wildlife habitat, for ecosystem services, and also for those flood attenuation goals that we all have.
This one might be maybe more for Tyler, but any of you are welcome to add in. But when can we coexist with beaver communities, and when do they need to be quote unquote managed?
Yeah, the simple answer is it depends. It's very site specific, but I think we're doing a really good job of coexisting with beavers right now. We have a really abundant, healthy beaver population in the state, and I get a lot of calls revolving around conflicts. That's my main job, and I receive around 400 calls and emails a year specifically related to beaver conflicts throughout the state. So I think we are doing a good job of coexisting. There are going to be times where beavers find themselves in what we think are not great locations, and it's up to the landowner on how they perceive if a beaver should be there, they want it there, or not. The real challenges come in when beavers are impacting our infrastructure, right? Like our public roads, our public and private infrastructure, including culverts and bridges. That's where the real challenges come in, because we all depend. How many people drove here today? You probably crossed over a culvert, and I would almost, depending on how far you traveled, you probably crossed over a culvert where there was at one point an issue with a beaver. It's just the nature of it. Culverts are really attractive to beavers, or vice versa, because it's the sound of running water that triggers beavers to build dams, and it's really easy for a beaver to plug a 12-inch, a 2-foot, a 4-foot culvert rather than build that 100-foot dam. So essentially the way the beavers see it is that the culvert is a hole in the dam and the road is the dam. So they're going to work smarter rather than harder. So that's why we have so many challenges with our infrastructure. And to really step back and understand why we are here because of it, it's because beavers weren't on Vermont's landscape when we put in a lot of our infrastructure. We extirpated them from the state due to unregulated trapping and habitat loss. We completely altered the landscape. Vermont was like 90 to 95% forest. We converted it to pretty much ag land, and it went down to about 30% forest. So it really changed what species could live here, including beavers. So then Vermont Fish and Wildlife, which was, I think, just Vermont, maybe Fish and Game at the time, in the 1920s actually relocated or reintroduced beavers back to Vermont because we recognized that this is a really important species, and if we can have beavers on the landscape, that's going to help bring back moose, black bear, and all these other species that we also lost when we altered the landscape. So in the 1920s and 30s, we reintroduced beavers into the landscape, and, I guess back up for a second, but that time period when beavers weren't here is when we built all of our infrastructure. Nobody was thinking about the issues of building a railroad through the middle of what was at one point a wetland. When they built that railroad, it probably wasn't a wetland because it had been drained and altered and all of that. But then we reintroduced beavers, and it was kind of prime for beavers to really take off and flourish because our land use during that time was also changing. A lot of our farm and agriculture started to kind of dissipate a little bit. A lot of farms were being abandoned, so we had a lot of young forests starting to grow up in these areas where it was once wetland. So a lot of our farm fields at one point were probably a wetland. So it made this ideal spot for beavers to come back. And there were no natural predators on the landscape at that time, so their populations just soared. And by 1950, we opened up the first 15-day regulated trapping season because we were already starting to get complaints of beavers creating issues for us. And we've had a regulated trapping season since 1950, and the beaver population has continued to just prosper and do really well in Vermont. And that's when, fast forward even further, in 2000, we recognized that beaver complaints were still like on the rise, and we needed a better way of providing assistance to landowners and towns and road crews who are having issues with beavers. Because again, we recognize that beavers do a lot of good on the landscape, but they can create issues. And by providing assistance to landowners through just on-site technical assistance, making recommendations, at some sites installing beaver baffles or exclusion fences, we can maintain this beaver-created wetland habitat for the many benefits that we've been talking about for wildlife and for people, but hopefully resolve the conflict that the beavers are creating. And just overall bring awareness and appreciation for beavers up from people, because people really tend to value wildlife until it starts to create an issue for them and cost them money. And then that value kind of goes down. So we want to keep people's value for this wildlife as high as possible.
We do have our slides working, so if there is anything that any of you want to show at any point, we can hop around and go to them.
The pictures are not really, you'll have to scroll a little bit to find what you want. This was a last minute addition.
Anything else on
I guess from like the kind of broader large wood and all types of restoration side of things. So I mean, we've got like beaver dam analogs that can be human made, post-assisted log jams, strategic wood additions are all kind of different ways of adding wood in different sizes and different areas of streams. And one of the things that we always have to very much consider when we're doing that kind of work, and is very much considered by the permitters who are granting us the ability to do that work, is how close we are to infrastructure. And what kind of infrastructure that is. So, our general rule of thumb is we, wouldn't put wood or any kind of like woody structures more closer than probably 500 feet. If it was, a fairly straight shot of river where you can actually see the culvert or the bridge downstream, we might put it 1,000 feet just to give ourselves lots of room. There are different methods when we're putting these kind of restoration projects together to ensure the stability of them as best as we can. But there is, all over the place wherever we kind of do this work, there are always, concerned citizens, road highway managers, who will point to the last time that it flooded and, well, this culvert washed out and you could see this huge tangle of trees in front of it. To which I always point out, well, we didn't even put any wood in that stream before that. So all of those trees were coming out of, the riparian, from the floodplain, from all sorts of other places. We're not really adding more to that if it's already a problem. The real problem is that the infrastructure downstream is too small to let all of that pass. There have been national studies done that, when culverts and roads fail, it's not because the culvert structure itself is overwhelmed with water. It's because rocks and branches and all sorts of things get stuck trying to move through that undersized culvert, plug it up, and make a very effective dam. And then it goes up and over the road and makes everything fail. So it's a little bit of a both and, where yes, we are very considered about how we do wood in streams, but at the same time we're also trying to address all of the undersized infrastructure that is currently on our landscape too.
There's a couple things I want to jump off from what Erin said. When we're building the beaver dam analogs, we're using relatively small wood. We're using like 3, maybe 4-inch posts, and they're not much taller than me. We're also using very small branches for weaving, and also softwood branches for kind of a filtering effect. And the thing about these beaver dam analogs is you usually don't build just one. You're going to build them in series. You're going to build several. And that's one of the great things about these low-tech process-based restoration techniques is that they're relatively cheap, so you can do more of them over a longer distance of a longer geographic distance for your project. So I've seen some that we've placed in a channel that have sort of migrated down, but they were caught by the next one. Additionally, any wood that fell into the channel could also be caught by some of the beaver dam analogs that we had installed in place. So they have this cumulative effect on the water impoundment, a little bit here, a little bit here, although they are leaky and are not barriers to fish passage generally. And they have this redundancy that helps them not create these problems in the first place as well. But of course also when you rebuild, considering the fact that there will be future floods that will be maybe large, maybe frequent, rebuilding with, doing a favor to your future self in rebuilding by upsizing is also key.
Yeah, and we're throwing around some of these terms, so maybe it's useful to like review what is a beaver dam analog, what is a post-assisted log jam, this strategic wood. So maybe just like talk a little bit more about like what these things are, what is the purpose, why would we put something like this in the stream, things like that.
So beaver dam analog is what you see here, and it's basically a human's attempt at doing what beavers do way better than we do. And they come for a lot of different purposes, a lot of different sizes of streams, and it's kind of very site specific that helps us determine what we put into a stream. So a lot of times, we've got ag fields that don't have riparian cover anymore, so we can't cut large trees into that. So what can we do? We can usually find saplings around upland materials that are also on the same property and bring those in to help construct, we put the vertical posts first, and then we take, the long, really whippy branches off the top, and we'll weave those in as best we can. Depending on, again, what is around, we can even add in root mats from grasses and from anything off the bank to kind of, again, help pack that in, much like a beaver would do, and try to make that as thick and as holding water as possible. Post-assisted log jams is kind of like taking that up a next step. So you can use, that's a little bit more like it. That's still mostly BDA because it's woven. I have one in there that's BDA. Go back one. That one. So you can see that it's larger material. So those are like 5-6 inch diameter logs, but we still use the posts to kind of keep those in place. We kind of anchor those in by driving the posts around the logs that we put in. And this was actually a really great application of a post-assisted log jam. We did a series of these downstream before we took out a dam. So a lot of the material that was, naturally mobilized by taking out a remnant dam, and it was just a small dam, like a, 5-foot dam. It was a lot of small material, a lot of this, pea-sized gravel and stuff like that. But the post-assisted log jams were stable enough to kind of withhold the water and the material coming downstream, but also kept a lot of it in place. So you can see how these are really well buried in. And this was maybe 3 months after the dam was taken out. So material is still now moving through the system way more freely now that the dam is gone, but a lot of that material that might still continue on downstream is being caught up here. So that's kind of the post-assisted log jam, and then strategic wood addition is taking that kind of one step even farther, and no posts are involved. It's really just using skilled sawyers to drop trees back into the stream, and then typically using something like a grip hoist or like a really big pulley to kind of pull them back in between other logs or other standing trees, or kind of forcing them behind boulders, into banks, things like that. so that they are going to be, a big jumble, a big mess. It is not the prettiest thing first off the bat, but it functions much like an old growth forest, where you would have natural trees that come to, their 200-year lifespan. They are naturally falling into the stream. So we're kind of trying to replicate that while the forest is still 80 to 100 years old instead. And this is, a method that we mostly use when we are way out there. We are not anywhere near infrastructure, but we're also making these jams big enough and stable enough that we have, actually, thanks to the last several years, plenty of evidence that even when they're hit by multiple 100 to 500 year floods year after year after year, they stabilize really well. They hold material really well. Judd Kratzer from Fish and Wildlife as well, who's the fisheries biologist for the Northeast Kingdom here, actually went through, not this past year, but the 2 years ago, massive flood on July 10th, and measured all of the sediment that was held up in these strategic wood additions in upstream, really well-forested areas. And his estimates were something around 300 dump truck fulls of fine sediments that were kept in upper watersheds and out of downstream properties. So that's all trees, materials, jams that stood up to it and have still stood up to it years afterwards, and continued to collect and build more material in there.
I'm going to take this opportunity to make a book recommendation. This is Low-Tech Process-Based Restoration of Riverskates Design Manual. This was developed by Anna Branch Solutions and the Utah State University, and it really goes into a lot of these project types that Erin was talking about, and it's got great diagrams, a lot of really good information, and also this particular copy has very nice sticky notes where I was particularly interested in stuff. So if you do want to take a look at this, I'll stick around a little bit and you can leaf through it if you'd like.
Yeah. So thinking about these kind of humans mimicking beaver-like structures or messiness, how do you decide where a good candidate for these kind of projects would be, and what are some of the considerations you make when thinking about doing one of these types of projects?
One thing we do like to think about is, will a beaver eventually adopt these projects? Because they do take maintenance over time, and beavers are really good at that. They even work holidays. And so we love to set these up or lay down wood to sort of tempt beavers into what could be a wood-starved reach of the river, so that they can then see, oh, this is a good idea, I see, and then take it over and then maintain it for us into the future, which is really great.
And to me, it also helps that, it almost helps direct beavers into certain areas versus others. If we kind of, give them the half-built version, the kind that we can do, they will see that as a way easier than starting their own from scratch 100 feet downstream, where we might not want it. And then they'll kind of take it and, as Meg said, maintain it over time, and yeah.
We also, there's a suitability of site that you have to consider as well. And there's logistical considerations. Is there wood available that we can bring toward where we're trying to install these beaver dam analogs? If not, how do we get it there, and what is acceptable to bring? Also, there's a steepness factor. Too much water moving too fast, you're not really going to be doing a whole lot of good by putting one of these structures in there. So you want to make sure that the steepness of your stream isn't just going to undo all the work you did and cause problems down the road. So you want to find relatively flat areas, places that make it so you don't have to build 100 feet wide. You find nice, good spots where it is possible to give streams access to their floodplains. So you don't want to be building these in maybe a slot canyon of bedrock or anything like that. So there are definitely suitability concerns, and we try to cite these in places where it does make sense that you can put these in, and you can put them in series, as I mentioned before.
Yeah. It's funny because next week we're talking about dam removal, man-made dams, and why would you remove them? What are the benefits to doing that? Can you talk a little bit more, like why are we putting in more dams on our river, and what is the difference between these type of things and human-made concrete dams that we might see around, and why is this maybe a flood resilience practice, whereas we're talking about in the event of a dam failure, man-made dam failure, that's a huge risk in terms of flooding. So can any of you speak a little bit more to that?
I'll touch on from like a beaver's perspective to kick us off. So even like these BDAs, they're more or less temporary. They're not going to last 100 years. They're probably not even going to last 50 years. The same with beavers. So beavers will move into a stream, like I was saying. They'll build their dam, and they're going to live there until they either deplete the food source or a flood or something washes out their dam and they decide that they're going to go somewhere else. So beaver-created wetlands are cyclic in nature, so they'll come and go. So they're temporary structures, but they can have a lot of benefit in the right places when they are in place in there. So you'll often see where beavers will build a dam. They'll completely change the landscape from what it looked like before beavers were there. They may live there for, it could be a couple of years, it could be 5 years, it could be 10 years. It really depends on the food source. And beavers are primarily eating hardwood trees. They're eating the cambium layer of the bark, which is that inner layer. So think aspens, maple, birch trees, alders, dogwoods, a lot of the species that are growing in and around those riparian areas. So once they deplete that food source, then they're going to have to abandon that site to go somewhere else, or they're just going to starve. So when beavers leave that spot, they're no longer maintaining those dams, and those dams will actually become porous fairly quickly. So every day, beavers are packing new mud in there to hold back that water. When they're gone, water filters through it. Water knows how to get downstream. So then over time, that area will kind of revert back to what it was prior to beavers being there. And all of that sediment that was underwater that's now exposed to oxygen is incredibly rich with nutrients, and it'll green up pretty fast. And then that food source will start to grow back, and that may take another couple of years or maybe even longer. But once that food source comes back, you'll have beavers return to that site most often.
Yep, and kind of as Megan said before, whether it's a BDA or an actual beaver dam, they're far more leaky than people give them credit for. We only see kind of usually the very top sections of it, but just like beavers can hear where the rushing water is, the fish coming upstream can feel where that water is moving, and so they will find those points and they will move through structures pretty easily. One of my favorite stories was talking to a fishing guide, and he had a property in like this little tiny stream, maybe 4 or 5 feet wide, and a beaver came along, built a little dam, and then made it bigger and bigger and bigger. And he was like, I never thought that there were trout in that like little 5-foot stream on his property, but the beaver made a really big pond, and all of a sudden he's pulling out like 6-7 inch brook trout from this beaver pond, and he's like, how did they even get there? And I'm like, they were there all along. It's just the beaver gave it the space to actually get big.
Yeah, some of the best brook trout fishing is in and around beaver ponds. And kind of to touch back on that point too, beaver dams really aren't a barrier to fish passage either. There's been a lot of studies, especially out west, looking at like migrating salmon, where they actually have tags in them and they can track those fish. Fish are able to get in and around these beaver dams, whether it's through high water or just like water flowing through a side channel or something. Fish can navigate up and down and past these beaver dams without issue. And you have to think about it, right? Because beavers and trout specifically have co-evolved for thousands of years. So if beavers were having an impact on brook trout populations, we would be noticing that by now, and we don't. They're doing really well.
I know also, and now we're kind of definitely talking more about beavers, that Tyler, you have some images in there of ways that we can coexist with beavers. I don't know if it makes sense to talk a little bit about those right now, but I can navigate to those slides too.
We're in the beginning, or no, it's okay.
Over here?
Don't listen to me. Or the
I think towards the end.
Yeah, I think that.
So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit through, like, if you get a call from somebody who is maybe having a beaver issue or something, walk us through maybe what you do about that.
Yeah. So start right from the beginning. Like, if somebody calls me and they have a beaver issue, I ask them a series of questions to try to like tease out information. Is this the first time you've had beavers here? Is this the first time you've had issues here? What is the nature of the problem? So are beavers plugging a culvert? Are they building a dam on a stream that's flooding your property? Are they chewing trees? One of the most common calls I receive is beavers in somebody's backyard pond. And it may be an issue of they're concerned about giardia, or it's plugging the outflow of the pond, or it's chewing trees. Those calls, I'll just provide advice over the phone. Since our program is specific to wanting to maintain beaver-created wetland habitat, we very rarely go to those sites because it's a man-made pond. There's no beaver-influenced wetland at those sites. So I could provide advice and recommendations over the phone in that way. If it's a site that I think is worth taking a look at to maybe provide site-specific recommendations, I'll schedule a site visit and go there and take a look. And again, depending on the site, it's very site-specific on where we'll get involved and do provide actual on-the-ground assistance. But at certain locations, if it's a culvert, we may be able to install an exclusion fence to help prevent beavers from getting access to the culvert, allow that culvert to remain open and clear and pass water as intended, and then hopefully allow the beavers to go maybe a little further upstream or downstream and have that wetland. So we're getting those benefits. So there's photos in there somewhere of a couple exclusion fences. They can come in many different shapes and sizes. Again, it's very site specific on how big it is and the shape. But again, the idea is that you're just preventing beavers from getting to that culvert. I will often install a series of pipe and another cage into that fence. The idea being that if the beavers do dam around it, which they occasionally do, is that pipe in that other cage will limit how high the beavers can build up on that fence. Because the beavers will start to build around it, they'll raise the water level up a bit, but then water will start flowing through that pipe. So essentially, they're not able to raise that dam up any higher. These are a really good option at the right spots. They don't work everywhere. There's a number of factors that kind of determine how successful these can be. Water volume is a big one. So if you have a bunch of water flowing through a site, it's really hard to build a fence that's going to withstand just natural rain events and flooding. And the last thing I want to do is build a fence or something in front of a culvert that then collapses because of a heavy rain event and causes the road to wash out. That's the last thing I want. So we are targeting, again, beaver-created wetland habitat and low-flow areas where these are going to have their highest success rate. The other device that we can install in certain locations would be a beaver baffle, and that's probably what a lot of you are familiar with. This is going to be a device that's installed through a beaver dam, and the idea is that it helps control the water level in their wetland to reduce flooding. If maybe beavers had built a dam and it was starting to flood somebody's lawn or something like that, a beaver baffle may be an option to help reduce that water level to an appropriate level where it's no longer creating the issue that the beavers had started to create, but allow beavers to have some portion of their wetland. So we're getting that benefit of filtering that water and for the many fish and wildlife species. The baffle itself is going to be a cage with a series of pipe. That cage goes upstream from the beaver dam, and when it's installed, you really don't see anything. So the cage that's in the boat right now gets dropped over the side. It'll sit completely underwater on the bottom. Water will enter that pipe, flow through it, and then through the notch we dig in the dam down below. So we can kind of set the water level to where it's appropriate based on how far down we dig into the dam. And ideally we have the cage at a minimum 30 feet away from the dam. 40, 50, even 60 feet is sometimes necessary. Because again, the whole idea is that you're baffling the beavers into thinking that they've stopped the flow of water, but we're actually sneaking it through. So if that cage is too close to the dam, when beavers are making their repairs at night, they'll just incorporate it right into the dam. So you got to have it far enough away where they don't associate that with the dam. So, yeah.
Great. Thinking a little bit more about flooding and kind of that was the impetus for bringing you all here. Can you talk a little bit more about the ways that like damming up our landscape, or in these cases, whether it's beavers, whether it's small dams, in a wetter world, how might that be beneficial for maybe somewhere like Hardwick, which is a confluence of the Lamoille River plus a lot of other tributaries? How might that be beneficial to us?
Yeah, so for me, any kind of, whether it's strategic wood or post-assisted logjam or beaver dam analog, anytime you're introducing roughness, anything that's going to slow the water down, to confuse the water, to take that energy of just like, you know, that wall of water image of here's a flood moving downstream and all of a sudden, oh, it's, you know, now it has to go off to one side, it has to go off to the other side. It loses that force. It loses all of that power as it's moving down towards, you know, generally village centers that are in the low-lying valleys. The kind of secondary benefit that I think we already kind of touched on a little bit as well is that when it slows the water down, it's also spreading the water out. So especially where we have the ability to do these kinds of projects around floodplains or things that used to be floodplains that we might be able to kind of bring back and access again. Anytime you can spread that water out, it's less water, again, that's moving downstream towards people's properties. And so that's really kind of the two primary cone benefits that I see for doing this kind of large wood work or small wood work in streams, and the benefits of beavers on the landscape, especially higher up in the watersheds, because the more you can kind of slow that water down from the start, the less impact that we see kind of on that cumulative as it moves downstream.
Not only is it good for flooding, but also holding water on the landscape in place is also really great during droughts, as we are seeing right now. And out west, they are especially these functions are especially critical because of the wildfire danger that they face out there. So holding water, spreading it out, keeping it on the landscape rather than going directly downstream can create these green fire breaks and can create wildlife oases, in addition to having those flood attenuation effects.
Yeah, so just to the drought part of things, one of the projects that we've actually done, it's harder to see when it's growing. I had a picture that I apparently didn't include that was in during the winter time, and just it was a farm field that over time the stream that went through it had dug down so that from the bottom of the actual channel to the top of the bank where the fields were was pretty well over my head. So it was like, 6-7 foot between those two elevations. And so one of the purpose of actually doing the project there was to catch some of the eroding material from upstream to bring the level of the bed back up, and to actually help bring the water table back up as well, because the farmer often grew corn right up to the edge. Corn can be a pretty thirsty crop, and it was, harder and harder to keep the corn growing well year after year, especially as the stream that went through the field kind of kept going down and down. So we did the project there while also saying, you're not going to plant corn right up to the edge of the field anymore. We get to replant a riparian buffer, but we're going to bring your water table back up at the same time. So it was a nice both and project in that way.
So I think now is a good time to maybe open it up to questions from the audience, and you're welcome to ask any of our three speakers, all of them. They can choose maybe which questions they want to answer. Yeah, let's go right over here.
Could you talk about relocation from troubled areas?
Yeah, so in Vermont, I'm assuming you're talking about beavers. So in Vermont, we're really lucky to have a healthy beaver population. So I can't drive more than a few miles without seeing evidence of beavers. So we don't allow for the relocation of beavers in Vermont. There's a number of reasons for it. One is that they're territorial, so you can't just take beavers from one area, put them in an area where there are other beavers, because they'll either get kicked out or killed because of a territorial dispute. And they also need a certain kind of habitat. They need good quality beaver created or good quality food sources to be able to live there. So if you were to put those beavers into an area that's less than ideal, or even if it is ideal, there's no guarantee that the beavers are going to stay there. They may just go somewhere else and start to create an issue for somebody else. So that's why a couple of the reasons why we don't allow it. Out west, they are doing beaver relocations or translocations, but that's because they're in a completely different world than us in relation to their beaver population. They do have large areas where there aren't beavers. Beavers haven't recovered in those areas, so they can kind of move those to kind of recolonize different areas. In Vermont, we're way ahead of that. We have beavers widespread throughout Vermont.
Thank you all for your presentation. This question is for Tyler. What is the population of beavers in Vermont at the current moment? You said we have a healthy and abundant population.
Yeah. So we don't have an actual number on the beaver population. It's not how we manage it. We get our information from our licensed trappers. So our licensed trappers are required to submit information on how many beavers they catch, how many trap nights they had out, how long they were trapping for. We can get information on catch per unit of effort, and we can monitor population trends over time. And that's what we're really interested in, is trends, not necessarily knowing that there's 100,000 beavers on the landscape. That number doesn't really matter. We want to make sure we have healthy beavers on the landscape, and we can do that through our trapper effort. And just knowing, like, from our observations with our project, if we don't have a lot of beavers on the landscape, we're not going to be getting the same number of calls. And since I've been in this position since 2016, the complaints have only increased. They haven't gone down yet, which tells me that the beaver population's doing really well.
I have a couple questions. Was it a baffle where you had the basket on the end?
Yeah.
What stops that from getting plugged up? How is it maintained, and where does the funding come from for that?
I'm glad you asked. Great questions. So those baffles, they do require maintenance. So you can't just install them and forget about them. If you do that, they may only last a couple of years. So I recommend at least once a year, grabbing a hold of that cage, lifting it up, shaking it off to get out any debris within that. So we have a database from all the installations that we do. I keep track of those, and I try to visit those sites at least every other year to maintain them, to make sure they're continuing to function. But I often, just because I'm busy with everything else, I often try to have the town or the road crew or landowners do that maintenance, or at the very least, let me know if something's changed, something doesn't look right, and I can put it on my schedule to get out there. For funding, so we work with multiple grants. We currently have a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grant that helps pay for my time to do site visits and do the installations. And then we get funding from the Vermont Duck Stamp Fund to purchase materials to build these devices. Ducks, really good wetlands. They need those wetlands, so they're willing to give us some money to do that work. We also get some money from PR, Pittman Robertson, which is the excise tax on sporting goods. But we also, when we're working with landowners or towns or whoever, what we do to extend our funding and have kind of people buy into the game more or less and be more invested in wanting to make sure these actually work, we'll split the cost of materials with landowners. So landowners are buying essentially 50% of the materials that we use, and it just helps keep them a little more invested, so it's not just something that we're doing completely free for them and then they just walk away and never think about it until it doesn't work. They're invested with it, and the idea is that they'll pay attention and want it to work long term.
I have a couple more. Your log jam in the woods, I think what I heard you say was that after the flood in 2024, you went back and measured the sediment, and it was 300 dump truck loads of fine sediment. Okay, so if you have, let's just say, a dam that you're removing that has a lot of sediment, okay, if 300 or 400 dump truck loads are in 1 year, what prevents that from becoming a new dam? Or what prevents that from breaking when it gets a high volume of this fine sediment in a flood event?
So part of what keeps it from becoming like an actual dam is the fact that we don't put necessarily a lot of trees or anything else in it. We don't like to put things directly across a stream, just precisely because it won't become like an actual dam. So we put things there in all sorts of angles, both, across the stream, but also at an elevation kind of way. And that makes sure that, the stream will always have a path through without getting basically to be a wall.
So if you had a dam that you were removing that had a significant amount of sediment built up over time, and you're removing that dam, what happens to all the sediment that built up there over time? What do you do with that?
Yeah. So when we're removing dams, like man-made dams specifically, a lot of that is regulated by the state as we go through the permitting. So over a certain amount, and it's a fairly low quantity that's allowed to just naturally mobilize out. So most of that is required to be actively removed from behind a dam during a dam removal. And then that is brought to a disposal site that is, regulated often by, towns or state or Army Corps, so that it's an approved place to bring all of this sediment that has built up behind a human-made dam that is now being removed.
And isn't that generally pretty rich? I think I heard you say in nutrients and minerals, and so could it not be sold?
Maybe. We'd probably have to go through the extra steps of chemical testing to make sure that there wasn't anything that was not supposed to be there. But it kind of depends on the contractor. Some contractors will go through that testing and then will reuse that fill for other material uses. But it's mostly up to, the contractor that we have take it off site is, they know what to do with things or not.
So you use it for fill in people's yards, free fill? Just curious.
I mean, I leave that to the professionals in the construction part.
So I think what I heard you say is if there was a significant amount and only a certain amount is allowed to go downstream, that you would have to remove what was there, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
With any of those projects, we spend 95% of our time thinking about the sediment and what to do with it, and talking to people about it, and paying for it, and that is a huge part of dam removal. And we will talk about that in a few weeks with the dam removal talk.
And I guess, similar to that, looking at a structure like this that's on the screen, isn't part of the point to build up sediment to raise the stream bed back up to its somewhat normal?
Yeah, so it's very much a balance between, the taking out of man-made dams and what we have to do as required through the permitting agencies versus what we can do with what are called nature-based solutions generally. Having having natural materials, retaining sediment within a stream channel is kind of regulated in a different way. And kind of like Tyler was talking about with kind of that natural beaver dam evolution, a beaver dam might be abandoned, and then within a couple of years the stream kind of reclaims and pushes through that natural material and it becomes a stream again. And we can expect the same things from here. So over time it'll have its own natural evolution of, the materials that are in that BDA will break down and the stream might find a pathway through, and it might not be in the center, it might be off to one side, and that again creates that sinuosity that we're hoping to see. But it's restoring that process and giving the river the chance to make those changes itself without us doing as much of the dictating.
A lot of the streams that we install these on are pretty incised, and so we say giving them back access to their floodplain. Right now, even with quite a bit of water flowing through the system, they may not tend to jump their banks. And
Can you say what incised means?
Down deep, steep walls. So sort of the stream is in a small canyon of its own.
Now after the floods.
Right.
Can't get down there.
Yeah, exactly. So when you impound that water, which is slow it down behind this leaky structure, you're raising the level of the water, you're slowing it down, and you're encouraging it to drop sediment, like we had said. As that sediment drops, it raises the level of the bed of the stream. And that, once these natural processes are restored, will give that river access to its floodplain again. So in a normal rain event, that water may be able to get out of the channel and access that floodplain, so that it doesn't have this reinforcing issue of being too deep in that channel and then having more and more water flow, and so just like reinforcing the depth of that channel. Instead, you're getting a nice normal regime of, getting out, spreading out, dropping sediment, and then not having that aqueduct issue.
One last question for you, Tyler. You said that the beaver dam populations are cyclical? So
Yeah.
What's the average cycle?
It varies based on food. So it's I can't give like a general,
Can you give me a range?
I could get, say, from like 6 months to 10 years. It varies greatly. It's all based on food. So, yeah, so beavers, they like to stay pretty close to the water. They feel a lot safer in the water than on land. So give or take 100 yards from the water is where they're going to stay, usually a lot closer. So once they deplete that food source within that range, they'll leave. And again, that varies on site. It could be a couple of years, it could be 5 years. There's some sites that are there's so much food there that beavers are there every year, all the time. Yeah.
So Tyler, that's half the cyclical, right? Because it regrows and comes back. So
Yeah. Yep.
you're really talking
Well,
10, 20-year cycle?
Yeah, so the cycle I was just referring to would be when it's active with beavers. So then, yeah, once beavers deplete that food source, it takes time for it to grow back. And what we're seeing is that since we have such a healthy beaver population, that beavers are moving back into these areas sooner because it's what's available for them. But yeah, it may take another 2 to 5 years for that food source to grow back before more beavers really are able to stay there for any length of time again.
Boy.
Maybe let's try to limit it to one question so we can get as many people as questions.
So initially, when you put these beaver dam analogs, and I don't know how long ago that started, when they sort of that beginning of human structures that were not concrete dams, but was the purpose then to create less flow and expand or deepen, let's say, the sediment and then deepen the channel? And then, or how much of it was to actually intentionally to attract beavers, or was that just sort of happened accidentally as a result?
Yeah, so since a lot of these methods started out west where, they don't have a lot of beavers and they're still reintroducing them in a lot of areas, there it was very much to kind of trap that sediment and to mimic beavers and to kind of create that process where the natural processes lacked. Then we kind of brought it out to the eastern states, I don't know, really getting it going like probably 10-ish years ago or so, and slowly ramping it up over time. And so every project kind of has a different goal to it. So I have done projects where I've brought in beaver dam analogs specifically to recreate and restore wetlands, or to, in this case, on the screen here, to grade that stream bed and bring the water table up, even though we know it's not going to become a wetland. And it's largely in areas where beavers aren't active. And so it's really only been, I want to say in the last probably 4 or 5 years, that we've kind of started to build them with the goal of having them get taken over by an active beaver population. So that's much more of a newer trend in how we use them versus identifying the restoration goal and building the methodology to it.
Yeah, up front.
Before the big flood, the first big flood, I had 2 beaver houses and about 3 dams along the Greensboro Brook, and all got wiped out. Now, what happened to those beavers?
Yeah.
Did they die?
It's possible. We got a lot of calls during like those 2 years with the flooding where, yeah, a beaver dam washed out because there's just so much water. There was 6, 8, 9 inches of water in a very short time. Beavers are really resilient, so yeah, it's possible that some of them died, but most of them, they just had to kind of regroup and restart building. So we got a lot of calls during that time where somebody would call and be like, yeah, I know there was a beaver wetland upstream of my house, and that dam let go. Now the beavers are in my pond in my backyard. What should I do? So like, beavers were like, all right, we have no water. We just lost everything. Where should we go? And they're following streams down. And they find this area where there's standing water, and they're like, oh, let's try to make it work here. But I also know that as soon as some of the floodwaters resided, beavers were already back to work rebuilding. So if it's a really good spot, they're just gonna rebuild and be right there.
Right, I just wondered.
Yeah.
In the back?
How long does a typical beaver live, and would that beaver typically stay in the same watershed?
Yeah. So the average lifespan of a beaver is probably around like 10 years. And again, I keep going back to it, but it's all going to be based on food. So they'll live in that area as long as they can. But they travel the waterways for the most part. So they'll go down a watershed, maybe like the Lamoille, then they'll hit a drainage, go up there until they find a good spot. But they will occasionally travel over land. I got a really cool photo, I think it was from April or May, of a beaver on the top of Sugarbush, like at the summit of Sugarbush. And the guy who sent it to me is like, is this normal? I'm like, not really, but it's just a beaver that's exploring, going to another area. And it's probably shorter to hop over the mountain than it is to go down the watershed. But for the most part, again, they feel safer in the water, and they're going to travel through waterways. But if you see a beaver walking over the mountain, it's possible.
I just wanted to introduce myself. I just moved to Vermont and wanted to network with all my fellow beaver enthusiasts. I've worked in California doing some process-based restoration, beaver dam analogs, and reintroduction focused stuff. I've also been a beaver trapper for 20 years. So afterwards, I'd love to talk to anyone who is good to network with about how to get involved with doing that sort of stuff. I want to get my boots wet.
Awesome.
My name is Stogan, by the way.
Welcome. Sure, right back.
Thanks. So I was talking with a landowner today who manages his property for timber, and the subject of beavers came up, and he says, oh, they're such a negative for timber. Every time a beaver moves in, I lose half an acre of land. Can you talk to what you might tell a landowner who you know, what's the trade-off between that half-acre land and the productivity of forest or whatever else you base it on?
Yeah, for sure. Ultimately, it's up to the landowner on like how they want to manage that property. But like you said, there are trade-offs. If you allow the beavers to be in that site, you're probably going to lose some timber. But there's some benefits of having the beavers on that parcel as well. Kind of we've been talking about it. Improves water quality, improves wildlife habitat and some diversity. And also when their beavers move into those like timber areas, again, they're going to kill those trees over time, and those standing dead trees or snags can create a lot of good nesting and foraging habitat for birds and mammals and things like that. But yeah, it's really up to the landowner on like how they want to manage it. If they're willing to give up half an acre or whatever, great, that's awesome. But if they don't want to, they don't have to.
In the way back, yeah.
I'm curious. Now I forgot my question. I've been waiting for so long. What was I going to ask? Come back to me. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, I remember now. Thanks. So I'm curious if there are coordinated efforts or appetite or interest in coordinating efforts in a watershed, either in a sub-basin, one of the tactical basins, or in a tributary, something like that. I mean, we're and maybe this is because Emily and I have talked a little bit about this, but like the idea that we have flooding issues, and especially for folks who are downstream, is really problematic. But can we be connecting with folks upstream to help slow down water and spread it, all that stuff? And I mean, I'm sure that we can model the numbers, but does that kind of thing ever happen? Or how would it happen?
It is a thing that can happen, and it takes a lot of coordination between landowners, oftentimes a lot of leveraging neighbor relations to kind of continue to reach people upstream. It can often take a lot of cobbling together a lot of different funding sources to address a lot of different things, but luckily state grants, up until recently federal grants, there are foundations that all have very vested interests in, you know, that intersection of flood resilience, of water quality, of habitat and connectivity, that it can work, but it takes a lot of time. I've done it on a few sections of different watersheds, usually at kind of the tributary scale, so something that's maybe 3-4 miles long is like a fairly reasonable sized tributary that we can work on through. I think the first time I did it was about 8 years total from end to end, and kind of in the middle of 2 more that are at like the 3 and 4 year marks each, and still going strong. So it is possible, but it's time intensive for sure.
Yeah, and I'll take a second to plug watershed groups and conservation districts who work on this really small scale. And we, at least at the Caledonia County Conservation District, spend a lot of time thinking about priority watersheds and trying to focus our attention on one watershed or another. And again, like Erin said, a lot of it depends on what funding is available and how that all sort of shakes out. But yeah, we do think on a watershed scale at the Conservation District, and especially with watershed groups because they're based in watersheds. But it just takes a lot of time, and the funding doesn't speak that way all the time.
Meg, did you want to add something to that?
I forget.
That's okay. Also in the back, yeah.
Hi, yeah, so piggybacking on this question here, I'm a property owner in Worcester, Vermont, and I have a lot of land facing north, and it's very steep. It's a farm, and a lot of water comes off of it. And I've been thinking about this question a lot, your question actually, because I studied it. back a bit. But anyways, a lot of the water that comes off my land hits this road, the Callis Road, which is pretty well traveled. And we just had to redo it after, it was like a year and a half ago, and it cost the town and the state something like well over $1 million to redo just this section of land, section of road that is hit by the water coming off of my farm. So I feel like responsible for it, but I can't do anything when I'm also working with NRCS for the farm, and I can't make any holding ponds or anything. I can't dig at all because I'm now with the NRCS supposedly getting funding, maybe never. And so I'm really curious how y'all work with marketing to landowners like me, like, hey, we can do this on your property, we can slow water down, here's money. Because I haven't heard from anyone, I'm fascinated by this, but I haven't heard from anyone saying like, yes, we would like to do this. But I see how it's directly affected this road, which is actually has it's very sandy soil at the bottom where the road is. So the water comes down and it just scoops out the sand from underneath it. And it happened terribly over the last 2 years, and then also I guess during Irene, the whole road was taken out, and it's a really well-traveled road.
So luckily, if you're already working with NRCS, these are actual reimbursable practices through them. If you want to write it down, if you give them the 395 practice for strategic wood addition and low-tech process-based restoration, those are payable practices through them. Otherwise, yeah, your best bet is working through conservation districts, watershed groups, restoration opportunities that are really good at finding and applying for the state grants, the federal grants, the foundations, and things like that that can help. It oftentimes when I'm doing projects and seeking out landowners, I try and make sure that they are not shouldering any of the cost because they're already, donating their land in many of its forms. If we're cutting trees, the value of those trees is significant. Or, if we are accessing floodplain, that's land that, we are regularly inundating. So that if the landowner is signing on to a practice that they know is going to change their property, I kind of tend to take that as that is their contribution to the project.
Shouldn't there be also like the triangle between, I happen to be an educated person who's interested in doing this work, but I feel like there should be an intersection between like the road crew, the town, and the private landowner, because I know the road crew gets pissed off that all this water's coming off, and then they have to do all this work over and over again. And it just feels like there's there's marketing that needs to be done as well as communication between the road crew and the.
Yeah, and a lot of the same organizations work directly with the towns to try and address the undersized culverts and the drainage ditches and the everything that also totally goes into road washouts and everything like that. And it's a process.
In the communications piece you speak about, yes, people are thinking about that for sure. And there's a number of different programs that sort of leverage this like peer-to-peer learning that a program like Lakewise is one of them, and that targets lakeshore homeowners. There's a program called Storm Smart, and that targets regular small landowners. There's a program called Streamwise, which targets landowners with streamside parcels. So there's several different communications toolkits that we have access to. For me, what it comes down to is the number of private landowners, like the sheer number of private landowners and the effort that it takes to create those relationships, and then the capacity to do that, right? Like our organization relies on grants too, so we don't have like 15 staff to go out and knock on everyone's door. And I don't say that to say like, oh, it's really hard for us, like we don't have any money, blah blah blah. I know that's what everyone faces, but I think in the face of the floods that we've had in the last couple of years, I think everyone's starting to recognize that there are things that we can all do on our own properties. It's just a matter of like making that leap into education and action, and how do we get there? What's the capacity? And honestly, this talk and this series of talks that's something that I felt like I could do to reach a bunch of people all at once, right? So it's a little more, can be more efficient than knocking on someone's door. So we're doing it, just not always in the ways that everyone can see all the time.
And working with your NRCD, your regional NRCD is really great because they have agricultural experience generally, are often in contact with municipalities, and have really direct relationships with NRCS. So it may be that they could be the key to this communication issue, but also, as Emily highlighted, the thing you pointed out is a well-recognized point of frustration pretty broadly.
And I will add too that I know that there is a true marketing campaign to landowners for stormwater related practices happening at the statewide level, because in order to meet water quality goals, we need a lot more stuff happening on private land, because most of the land is private. So I'm not sure if these practices are fundable by clean water funds. Yeah. Do you know? Yes. Yeah. So I think that is definitely something that a lot of people are thinking about, is how do we even get the word out there that there is funding available to do stuff in your backyard property if you think it's an appropriate area to do that. And so doesn't quite get to your specific question, I think, but knowing that that is an effort out there. Yeah.
Can I just link these questions to the Lamoille River, because for those who, many got affected by the last two floods, and maybe this is a question for Opie or Kristen. Is there not a study going on about the Lamoille itself and
Yeah,
mitigation efforts?
I can speak to that a little bit. There is a Lamoille, yeah, Kristen can too. There's a Lamoille modeling study that's happening in conjunction with the feasibility study that I'm working with for Jackson Dam. And SLR Consulting is doing both of those. And that there should be some meetings this fall, I'm thinking. Yeah, that will be public.
And that's through our Regional Planning Commission. But as far as the Lamoille watershed goes, we're kind of disjointed. We're in 4 counties, which means 4 conservation districts, 3 RPCs, couple different towns. And so my dream is to have a watershed group. And I actually just had a conversation with the Watershed United of Vermont director, and we're going to see what we can do. We're going to see if we can get some energy around it, because we are all part of the same watershed, and that was the idea of having these conversations. So.
Yeah, I think we've got time for about one more.
Well, related to that,
okay, yeah.
what I really appreciate about all your comments is that you've given us this view of a watershed restoration, because a lot of us focus on not even the whole river, just like our little section of the river. So ideally, like in the long term, we'd be restoring all these upland streams, small streams, and we'd work it all down, and we do the stormwater management in the urban areas. But in the meantime, we're trying to engineer this river to kind of for the near term. And I guess I don't know if this is going to happen anytime in the series, but we get a lot of comments. Right? I hear a lot of people talk about we over New Hampshire or Maine, they pull they clean their rivers. I don't know what they're talking about. I mean, I do know what they're talking about. I just don't know if it's true. But they want us to pull more things out of the rivers. When you talk about roughness and slowing things down and strategic wood, given where we are today, like, are there pros and cons of leaving lots of wood in the main channel of the Lamoille?
The main channel gets, anytime you've got like more of a navigable waterway, it becomes a little trickier, because that wood that ends up in kind of the really big channels with a whole lot of power behind them, those are going to mobilize. And I feel like the knee-jerk reaction of every town in every state across the board is that when a flood comes through, yes, 100% clean out the river. We've seen it on the White. We've seen it, across our state, across other states in New England after they see a flood. In Maine, I've got a project partner who's working on the Sandy River, who is having lots of issues around towns that, scalped certain areas for gravel to fill in roads, and then now they've got this massive erosion problem, and it's right next to a road, and it always kind of cascades that way. So do they? Yes, because it's everybody's reaction. Should they? Absolutely not. The more you can leave in a river, the more roughness you can leave there, the better. And there are engineered ways to put large wood back into like the bigger navigable channels, but that requires a lot of engineering, a lot of embeddedness in construction. And I've actually done a few of those projects in a few different states now. And they take time, and I think a lot of people, they're still very new using large wood and root wads instead of just rip-wrapping everything. It is absolutely possible, and the more that we do and the more kind of proof of concept we can put out there, the more people are kind of coming around to it as a practice. But it is still not particularly common yet. I hope that it will be more so over time.
That's helpful. Appreciate it.
All right, now it's the last.
You just spoke of riprap. Nobody's ever discussed here about maybe putting boulders in rivers to make them rougher.
It's pretty shocking how big of a boulder floodwaters can roll. Yeah. Although the idea of added roughness is a sound one, absolutely. But if you've heard even a small stream during a flood, which I imagine that you may have, it's pretty shocking how loudly and how big the boulders are that are rolling down there. Yep. It would be difficult to.
So there's no point in placing boulders.
Not necessarily. Well, do you have a?
Well, so it's also kind of a bit of a balance of I don't like to put really big boulders into streams where they don't already exist because it's not natural to the system. So like if you've got a really sandy stream or a really gravelly stream and you put a whole bunch of boulders in there, then you're just going to have all of those, that sand and gravel basically erode out from the boulder, and it'll either sink itself down or that'll be what pushes it downstream, is that everything else has been worn away around it, because you need that kind of gradation of materials. You need a little bit of everything. So if the boulders aren't already there, it's not a great idea to just put them in and hope for the best. And that's the kind of thing that is also regulated by A&R and the stream alteration permits. Anything over 100 cubic feet of material going into a stream, and they want to know about it. So there are instances, again, generally in like dam removals where you've got a really big drop between one side of the river and the other, that we might be able to place boulders as a way to, kind of soften that drop, and decrease the overall erosion in a system. But generally, it's not a practice that they like to see.
Well, let me just say there are those people around here may not have been around long enough. There are those 3 giant boulders upstream from Hardwick that were put in to deal with ice jams.
The granite blocks by the Army
granite
Corps of
blocks,
Engineers.
and those have not moved.
Not
but
moved.
I'll get Opie to find me pictures of those and put them in the paper so you see how big something has to be not.
Yeah, oh yeah.
The Corps of Engineers did that.
Oh yeah.
They're buried.
Corps of Engineers do lots of things.
All right, let's give our panelists a round of applause.